It's a legend that's haunted Louisville for years, the tale of a monster lurking on a train trestle, waiting for his next victim.
As predictable as a sunrise, trains cross the Pope Lick train trestle every day. At night, a monster lures his prey.
I didn't really find a definitive story of what the legend was. There were some main elements.
The Pope Lick monster. 2 legs and hooves like a goat. Coarse brown hair covers his body. At his torso, he begins to resemble a man. Then his head, a goat's, curling sharp horns and piercing yellow eyes.
The Pope Lick monster is a creature that comes out at night and it lures you across the train tracks into his eyes, which is really the eyes of an oncoming train.
In 1988, Ron made a movie about the Pope Lick monster. When he started, there were reports of trespassers on the trestle. But by the time the film debuted, 2 people had lost their lives.
Hey guys, welcome to a new episode of Cryptids and Cases. How are you guys doing today? I hope you're doing super well. I know that it's been quite a while since my last podcast episode. I think at this point it's been like 4 months, and I am super sorry for that. I'm not going anywhere, I promise. This podcast means so much to me, and it's here to stay. I have not abandoned it. I've just had a lot going on personally in the last few months that have kind of taken me out of the headspace to do podcasting. I've mentioned before that I have some chronic illnesses, and I won't lie, after October of last year, things kind of took a nosedive in every way that they could. I finally got some new medications and doctors figured out though, and this month I have felt so good. And so I'm really excited to get back to it. This podcast just means so much to me. I haven't been able to work the past year because of my health, and I really struggled to find something that gave me meaning because for the longest time, my meaning came from work and what I could provide. So creating this podcast just made such a huge difference. It gave me something to do, something to stay busy with, and let me have a sense of purpose. Even though it was super scary in the beginning, and I'm still definitely figuring it out, and each episode I'm growing a little bit more. It was just so worth it, and I'm definitely going to keep doing it, so no worries. I think for now, I just have to accept that I will do my best to adhere to a set schedule, but also understand that there might be times when I don't feel super great, and I might have to deviate from that schedule. Regardless, I hope that you guys will still tune in and understand, and I thank you so much for the patience. It's been really sweet to have a few people ask me, hey, like, what happened to your podcast? Like, I want another episode. What's going on? So I really appreciate you guys. That aside, let's get into this episode because I'm pretty excited for our topic today. Imagine that you are driving late one night through some winding roads in rural Kentucky. Against the darkness of the night sky, you can see a large trestle bridge looming ahead. As you draw closer, you begin to feel your skin prickle. An ominous and daunting feeling sets in, and your hands get a little clammy against the steering wheel. Every ounce of you is warning you to turn around, but maybe you like the pulse of the unknown a little. Or maybe the small 2-lane road just isn't safe enough to turn around on through the darkness, trees, and the winding nature of it. You continue forward, and as the bridge grows closer, the feeling that you are not alone starts to weigh heavy on your shoulders. Suddenly, you feel like you're being watched. Just ahead, under the bridge on your left, you can swear that you briefly see a dark figure move. You try to convince yourself that it's just the paranoia. That is, until you see a flash of what looks to be a pair of eyes reflecting your headlights back at you. A bipedal figure rises, and all of a sudden you realize you really aren't alone. You press your foot to the gas, fly under the bridge, and leave the mysterious figure behind in your rearview mirror. without looking back. Let's get into the tale of the Pope Lick monster. I wanted to pay homage to the state I lived in for so many years that I loved so deeply in this episode. The last one was about Mothman, who is my favorite and originated from the state my dad and his family are from. So I guess I'm starting a pattern of picking cryptids from the places that have some sentimental value. For this one, we will dive into Kentucky to unravel the mystery of the Pope Lick monster. I first heard of this cryptid while living in Kentucky, and I feel like you can't live there without having heard about it at some point or another. Now, if you haven't heard of the Pope Lick monster, I've also heard of him referred to as the Goat Man, which is an adequate name given that the monster is said to be half man, half goat. This cryptid in particular is said to live under a trestle bridge just outside of Louisville, Kentucky. Now, side note to my friends in Kentucky, do not roast the way I say Louisville. People in Kentucky are so passionate about you saying the name right. And unfortunately, 7 years in Kentucky, living pretty close, I still can't quite get the name right. You've really got to say it as if you've got like a mouthful of cotton or bourbon in your mouth. I don't know. There's definitely an art to it. Just be grateful I'm not calling it Louisville or Louisville and cut me some slack, okay? Tangent over. Now, the Pope Lick monster is not a recent myth. There have been recorded sightings as early as the 1800s, though the origins of the cryptid are kind of up for debate. From my research, there seem to be 3 potential originations for this creature. The first came from an early report that detailed what appeared to be a sheep-man hybrid who allegedly escaped from a freak show. The second is that the Pope Lick monster is a Native American curse, which was begat by the tribe that used to live on the land that the Trestle Bridge is located on. The third rumor as to where the Pope Lick monster came from is that he was once this old goat farmer who made a deal with Satan himself. According to the legend, he sacrificed one of his goats in order to get supernatural powers, which left him as some sort of immortal man-goat hybrid. That one sounds the most far-fetched to me, but to be fair, there's a lot that is far-fetched about cryptids, so bear with me. Though the origins of the Pope Lick monster are a little up in the air, there is one thing that all can seem to agree on. He resides under a trestle bridge in Kentucky. Now, if you look at pictures of this trestle bridge, it looks super decrepit and creepy, and there's no wonder that something cryptic has came from that. It just looks so rusted and big and overgrown. I've actually been in the area before, and despite the beautiful greenery all around, there is this kind of spooky, alluring feeling that you get around it. I actually plan to swing by again whenever I visit Kentucky next, and I'll try to take some videos for you guys. I think it would be kind of fun to go near sunset and get some nighttime filming going. Disclaimer though, if you guys ever do decide to swing by, please keep a note that despite the trestle looking all rickety and abandoned, it's actually still in use. The bridge itself is only wide enough for the train, and it has no railings to keep anybody from falling off. So stick to exploring under the bridge only. Don't be too daring and step on it. Multiple signs and fences around the bridge warn of no trespassing and the dangers of getting onto the tracks, so it's best to play it safe and just keep away. Locals specifically warn against visiting the bridge after night, saying that when the sun falls is when the Pope Lick monster or Goat Man ventures out from under the bridge to terrorize those caught in his path. What precisely he does to those that he catches is a little ambiguous and varies from story to story and depending on who you ask. However, none of the stories end in a favorable fashion. All conclude with an individual dying once the monster looks at them, whether that be from the monster lobbing an axe at them, jumping out at them, or even using some sort of mind control to lead them onto the bridge, then prompting them to jump off by hypnosis. The spookiest thing about the Pope Lick monster, in my opinion, is that it is also said to be able to mimic voices and can sound like someone who is distressed or crying out for help in order to lure someone onto the tracks. Can you imagine just driving under the bridge at night and hearing the screams of what sounds to be like a human being in danger or pleading for help. There definitely shouldn't be anyone in the area, as the popular part of the bridge is pretty tucked away in the forest. So that thought alone just sends shivers down my spine. Then again, I've never been a fan of the concept of being in the forest and hearing someone in distress in the distance. There are so many legends that involve that specific thing, and it never ends well for those who attempt to help. My advice, just stick to the if you heard something, no you didn't mentality if you're ever in the forest alone and hear some strangeness. If you've ever lived in the Appalachian Mountains like I did for a little bit, you've probably heard that saying all your life. But I digress. Do I personally believe that a monster is using mind control to lure people onto a tall bridge and then cause them to jump off? Probably not. But what if I told you that in a roundabout way, that has been the case? The legend of the Goat Man has spread pretty rampantly in the past few decades, especially after a movie featuring him came out. And the intrigue of the cryptid has pulled many to come explore the trestle he is said to plague. There have been a dozen or so deaths on that trestle, many who were placed in harm's way because of the curiosity and the pull that the story of the Goat Man brings. One of the most well-known instances of a Pope Lick monster-led incident involved a woman named Raquel Bain. Raquel was a bright young woman living in Dayton, Ohio, and was 26 when she decided to visit Louisville, Kentucky with her boyfriend, David Nee. Raquel worked at Miami Valley Hospital as a surgical assistant and was typically pretty busy, so she was super excited to be able to have some time off and visit a destination that had caught her eye. That destination was none other than Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville. As a little sidebar, I could make a whole video on Waverly Hills if it fit into the true crime or cryptid category. I have been there multiple times on various different tours, and I'm also one of the admins in a big Facebook group for fellow fans. I also just have a lot of love and respect for that place and have experienced a lot of unexplainable things there. So when I heard that Raquel had been interested in touring, I really couldn't blame her. I also have loads of pictures that I've taken on my tours. If any of you guys are interested, I guess I could post those. Waverly hosts both historical tours during the day and paranormal tours that occur after dark. Raquel and Daniel had gotten tickets to the paranormal tour the night of April 23rd, 2016 at 10 p.m. They made the 3-hour drive from Dayton to Louisville and stopped to grab some dinner. When they finished eating, they realized that it wasn't even 7 p.m. yet, and they had a few hours before their tour time at Waverly. Raquel told her boyfriend of another spooky thing that they could stop by and view before their tour, and told him of the legend of the Pope Lick monster. Daniel already wasn't super thrilled about going to do the Waverly tour, as he had some reservations about it, which I totally get. I've asked a few friends to go with me, and while some eagerly attended, others have been like, absolutely not. So I don't blame him there. It makes sense that he wouldn't be super thrilled at the thought of stopping by a trestle bridge said to be haunted by a famous cryptid, but Raquel really wanted to go, and he knew that she really loved creepy things like that, so he agreed. The pair ended up driving to the trestle bridge and pulled over to get out of the car. Daniel recalled that there were multiple signs warning against trespassing, as well as a tall barbed wire fence, but that there was a discernible gap in the fence and a path up the hill, so they ascended it. The trestle bridge spans across the gap between two hills. And if you've ever been to Kentucky or lived there, you know that the hills can sometimes be more like little miniature mountains. And for the vast expanse of the bridge, there's nowhere to go but over the edge. So this bridge was pretty high up and it was pretty long. And for a vast expanse of it, there's nowhere to go but over the edge. Once you step off of the hill that the track is on and go onto that bridge, as I mentioned before, there's only room for the train, and considering the long length of this bridge and how fast trains are, outrunning one and making it to the other hill is an impossible task. Now, when they got to the top of the hill, Daniel assumed that was it. He thought they had come up, were going to see the bridge, and then call it a day. He turned his back to the bridge to try to take a selfie with her and go back down, but Raquel wanted to actually venture onto the bridge. It's said in some tales that the Pope Lick monster actually won't even reveal himself until someone steps onto the bridge, so I'm thinking maybe that was her line of thought. Raquel was known to have an adventurous spirit, so I'm sure that this didn't really surprise Daniel either. Daniel recalled that the trestle looked rickety and old, and they assumed that it was abandoned, having not been from the area to know that it was still active and in use. He also said that it looked like it would be Russian roulette to try to step across. So that probably led him to believe even further that the tracks were abandoned, as they didn't seem to be able to support a person, much less a train. Raquel pushed the envelope of adventure, as she was known to do, stepped onto the trestle bridge, and offered her hand to Daniel, who hesitantly took it and followed her onto the bridge. The couple had ventured a decent length down the trestle when the sound of distant rumbling could be heard. And at this point, the sun hadn't quite set, so in the distance they could see the unmistakable view of a train. The train quickly spotted them and tried to slow down, but trains cannot stop on a dime. It can take about 1.5 miles for a freight train going 55 miles per hour to come to a full stop. They also couldn't make it to either hill in time, and to jump off the tracks meant a 90-foot fall to the ground. Panicking, Daniel noticed a small slat of wood tucked just under the bridge that he reasoned he could hang onto while the train passed. This would be a very difficult feat, as one would have to hang off of the tracks with their entire body while gripping onto these small thin slats while a train rumbled through for 5 or more minutes. Then you would have to have the strength, after dangling there for so long, to pull yourself back onto the tracks. Daniel began to yell at Raquel to get off the tracks and hang onto the slats as he got on his stomach and kind of worked his way off of the trestle, his whole body hanging off while he held onto that piece of wood. Unfortunately, Raquel just didn't seem to be moving fast enough. The train hit her, and the force of the impact sent her off the tracks. Miraculously, Daniel managed to hold on until the train passed, likely in large part, in my opinion, due to the strength he'd gained as a martial arts instructor who regularly lifted weights. Frantically, he ran to the other side of the trestle, descended that hill, and found Raquel. It was immediately apparent that she was not alive.
It is a train trestle that has gotten a whole lot of attention through the years, and that attention turned tragic over the weekend. Thanks for staying with us at 4:30. I'm Rachel Platt. Talk of a creature living under that trestle near Jeffersontown brings out thrill seekers, and police are now trying to determine if that's what happened over the weekend. Holden?
Well, Rachel, investigators told me today that 26-year-old Raquel Bain was in town with her boyfriend from Ohio on a paranormal sightseeing trip. The two were supposed to head out to Waverly Hill, but they never made it after deciding to check on a local legend on their own. After living near the Pope Lick Trestle his whole life, Ron Crouch says he's no stranger to the local legend.
The myth is you have to walk on the bridge to see the goat man.
He says for years the legend has kept people flocking to the area, but he's never understood what all the fuss was about.
The only thing I see is a few deer every once in a while. And I wouldn't confuse those with a goat.
To try and improve safety in the area, some signage was put up along with this fencing, which has been padlocked shut. But that hasn't kept people from sliding through the gate, going out on the tracks, and breaking the law.
People might say, well, if they hadn't gone here, if they hadn't gone there, well, you just don't know, and you can't live your life that way. But when there are clearly signs that state, maybe private property, no trespassing, there's a reason for it.
As the owner of Waverly Hill, Tina Mattingly was supposed to be giving Bain a tour of the sanatorium the night of her death. Mattingly now hopes that other paranormal investigators will think twice before taking a risk with their lives.
I'm very upset over it. It's very sad, and it's just I really wish it hadn't happened. It's just not worth it.
A Louisville Metro Police Department spokesman says that Bain's boyfriend will not be charged with trespassing for being out on the trestle illegally. Norfolk Southern Railroad says they will work with local law enforcement to try and find ways to shore up the area and keep people off the tracks in the future. Live in the newsroom, Holden Kruwicki, WHAS 11 News.
When I first heard the story, I was just devastated for the little boy that Raquel left behind, her boyfriend, and her family and friends. According to her obituary, she was a bright and wonderful woman who had a love for painting and was a multifaceted musician. She was adventurous, daring, fun, and a little rambunctious, and had a positive impact on so many people. Though an actual monster hadn't come out and lured her onto a bridge with mind control,
she had been lured onto this bridge by tales of the legend. The Pope Lick monster, in a roundabout way, had been one of the factors in her death. I do want to pause here and say again, don't go on the Trestle Bridge. Daniel might have been able to hold onto that edge and dangle his body, but that is so remarkably difficult to do. I just want to reemphasize that. It's just really not worth the risk. Now, death aside, which is huge, you can also be fined for up to a few $1,000s or serve jail time for a felony if you are caught trespassing. Another victim of the legend itself and the trestle was a 15-year-old girl named Savannah Bright, who tragically met her end on May 26, 2019.
People that have experienced these horrible tragedies and with the friends and family left behind to tell the story, it's devastating.
One of those families.
Really empty. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. Like,
Still trying to piece together
I've kind of felt that way ever since this happened.
what happened the night their daughter, their friend, died.
Every room she walked into, she lit it up, and I think it makes a lot more sense why her last name's Bright, because, she made my life bright.
Earlier this year, Savannah was with a group of friends on May 29th. Their night led them to the trestle. Savannah and a friend walked out onto the platform as the sun was dipping behind the trees. The story of what happened next differs from person to person, but when a train came, we know Savannah was hit and did not survive. Her father, Tommy, rushed to the trestle that night, a place they'd been before, just a year before her death.
I explained to her how there's this legend, it's not true, don't give it no thought, and explained to her how high the trestle was up and the room on the trestle, and don't ever go up there because it's kind of a no-win scenario.
A real danger wrapped in a legend.
When we have situations where people are coming to our property to search for things, we'll still educate the exact same way.
Hugh McCormick is the manager of special investigations for Norfolk Southern Railroad's police department. On the day we met with him, he was educating people living and working near tracks about the dangers of trespassing.
So we give them the same warnings we will for anybody that's trespassing on our property, and then we'll escort them off. If they continue to keep coming back, that's when we take it up to the next level, or we either give them a citation or even doing a misdemeanor arrest.
But the challenges associated with keeping kids away when an urban legend draws them in is something unique only to the Pope Lick Trestle.
No, I cannot. Off the top of my head, I cannot think of another area.
There's a no trespassing sign on the fence closest to the trestle, a fence we found bent back. At another entrance near a public road, the only trespassing sign we could find was this one, posted by Norfolk Southern, ignored by trespassers.
It's extremely stressful, especially to our engineer and conductor on those trains. They do what they can to notify somebody that they're coming through.
It's a message Savannah's family says the rail company could do a better job enforcing.
They know people going up there. They're gonna know people going up there. So for me, putting a walkway or something up there would allow people safe passage. Now, granted, they still shouldn't be trespassing.
They hope by sharing their story, Savannah's death can teach others to stay off the trestle and avoid the spell of the Pope Lick monster. With photojournalist Beth Peak, I'm Haley Minogue, WHAS 11 News.
I, like Savannah's parents, really want to share these stories not as entertainment, but as a tale of caution to those listening. I love talking about cryptids and going to spooky places, but it's so important to do so safely. Don't get carried away by the legends and try to do something bold or dangerous. It's obviously okay to have these interests, I certainly do, but please be safe in your visits, explorations, and investigations. Now, I tried to scour the internet for stories of people who have said that they have encountered the actual goat man, not just they were drawn to the bridge for the legend, but that they actually saw him. I found a really interesting article about the Pope Lick monster, and I'm going to quote a section of the article from thecryptidatlas.com. I recently discovered this website like a few days ago, and it is so interesting. And if you love cryptids, you're gonna love that website. So please check out thecryptidatlas.com. Now, here is the passage from that website. Quote, "Over the years, locals have told stories of the Pope Lick monster terrorizing their cars late at night. One young couple told the local museum owner, Rod Whiteneck, about an encounter they had one evening as they were leaving the park. As the sun set, they were driving under the trestle to head home when a man with large horns and cloven feet jumped from under the bridge and grabbed their door handle, ripping it clean off. They floored it, quickly getting up to around 60 miles per hour. But when they looked out of their window, the monster was still following alongside before slowly falling out of pace with their speeding car." Another similar local story tells of a young man who encountered the Pope Lick monster as he drove under the trestle where the creature lunged and slashed at the side of his car before jumping onto his windshield. He slammed his gas pedal down and heard the sound of claws tumbling across the roof as he sped off. I don't know about you guys, but this Pope Lick monster sounds pretty aggressive and definitely not a cryptid that I would want to come across. Those two encounters were super interesting, but I wanted to see if anyone else had an encounter with the Pope Lick monster. I was able to go to Reddit, which is always super interesting. Again, take those things with a grain of salt on Reddit, but still, they're super interesting. I found two experiences on Reddit that I will read to you guys now. The first one is from the /cryptids subreddit. Someone asked, "People who live in/have visited Louisville, Kentucky, have you ever encountered the Pope Lick monster or seen anything strange near its bridge?" User Wanna Hunt Evil said, "Yes, when I was in elementary school. I live in Kentucky, near Louisville. There was a field to the left of our school. It was somewhat wooded. I saw a hunched over man's body with a goat head. Keep in mind, I didn't know this kind of stuff. It was holding a stick/bone and what looked like a turtle shell. When I got home, I told my parents and they were terrified. They looked it up and boom. That's exactly what started me on cryptids." Now, the second story that I found is a little bit longer, so bear with me. It is still super interesting. This one is a little bit different though. Now, if you'll remember, one of the possible origin stories is that the Pope Lick monster came from a Native American curse due to stolen land that the Trestle Bridge is located on. Going even further into that theory, some claim that the Goat Man/Pope Lick monster is actually a Native American skinwalker. Now, that is the only time I will say the name skin, insert word here. I have been told and have heard that you do not say that word or you risk invoking that thing. You risk attracting it. You risk bringing in that negative energy. And so as a respect for the culture, I will not say that word, and also as a precaution. Now, that entity really isn't in my belief system per se. However, I do believe personally that bad things, demons, bad spirits, whatever you want to call them, can really like attention. And they can attach themselves to things or concepts that masses of people have always found to be negative. If you give negative energy to something, if you bestow that upon something and you say, this thing is bad, don't say it, I just feel like that makes it easier for bad things to attach to and get attention for. I'm not writing off the existence of those things. I really do keep an open mind. So I'm not saying they don't exist, but I'm also saying if they don't, either way, because of how negative that word is and how much caution people have taken not to say it, I try to just not say it too. You can never be too cautious, and it's always going to pay off to be careful, right? It's not hurting anything. Now, if you don't know what those entities are, I call them flesh pedestrians. But if you don't know what those skin things are, basically, they are able to take the form of anything that they want. They can take the form of an animal. They can take the form of a person. Usually, though, there's something a little bit off about them. Like maybe they look like a person, but there's something a little strange. Or they look like a deer, but the deer looks a little bit weird in the eyes. Something like that. Now, they do this to then lure people to their deaths. Feel free to look into those skin entities all you want. I really wanted to do an episode on them, but they're also just part of someone's cultural beliefs, and I kind of want to respect that. And also, if I don't even want to say the name, it would be kind of hard to do an episode on. So keeping in mind the Goatman is said to possibly be one of those things and what those things can do to lure people to their deaths, I will proceed with the story. No Sleep says, it's time to recount my experience with the Pope Lick train trestle. This all happened several years back when I was 19. I had been dating a girl for a few months at this point, Heather. She is a very sweet girl, but has a bit of an adventurous side to her. So she, of course, tells me she wants to go and look for the Pope Lick monster. I originally refused due to the multiple deaths that had happened at this location. I didn't want to be the next dummy in the newspaper who met an early demise looking for a goat man. This leads to her teasing me, calling me a coward, and saying I didn't have the balls to do it. Well, I am ashamed to say that her tactics worked, and I finally caved and agreed to go with her to the trestle. So we plan it all out, and we head out there one night. She was absolutely excited about hunting down the Pope Lick monster. We parked our car on a road somewhere nearby and made our way through the woods and up a hill to try and make our way to one of the ends of the Trestle Bridge. We took a short break in the woods for a little bit and decided to have a little bit of fun. I thought things were going to get a little bit more exciting, but she suddenly got a mischievous look in her eye and dashed off into the woods ahead of me. I quickly got up and tried to chase after her. I lost sight of her, but I knew where we were headed, so I just made my way towards the rail. It took a little time as they don't make it easy to get to since there have been a number of deaths. I had to climb a fence, for example. Heather was already standing by the tracks by the time I made it there. I started to walk her way when suddenly that same mischievous smile appeared on her face once again. "Catch me if you can," she said with a smirk, and she began running out onto the trestle bridge. This, of course, worried me a good bit. I tried to convince her to come back to safety and continuously refused to walk onto the bridge. She, of course, kept goading me and calling me a pansy for not being adventurous like her. I finally relented and made my way out onto the trestle. Once I had gotten closer, she dashed off further onto the bridge. She started giggling and kept asking me to come get her. At this point, I had had enough. I raised my voice at her and said, "Cut this out. You're going to get us both killed. This ain't cute." This seemed to have ticked her off majorly. She just stood in the middle of the bridge and she said that she could make her own decisions and that I wasn't her dad and she could take care of herself. I felt like maybe I had been a little too harsh, so I made my way over to apologize. Now I will pause in the story because the next part does get a little intense, so a fair warning. Continuing, it says, "We eventually made up a little after talking and sealed it with a kiss. About this time, I heard a sound that struck fear into my heart, a somewhat distant train horn. 'We gotta go,' I basically shouted at her. I grabbed her hand and began to lead her back to safety, but I only took a few steps before her arm stopped me from moving. I turned back around, and it was clear what had happened. Her foot had gotten stuck in a weird area on the tracks. She immediately sat down and started working on freeing her foot from the tracks. I went into full-on panic mode and attempted to help her as well. The sounds of the train horn drew closer and closer, and my anxiety went higher and higher with each time it sounded. It would be in sight any moment now, and we were going to have very little chance of outrunning a train. Heather had begun crying at this point and begging me to help her get free. At this point, her ankle was bloody from her digging in it with all her might and trying to pull it free. I continued to try and free her with all of my might, but still nothing would budge. I was trying desperately to look for a solution to the problem, when suddenly a light in the distance caught my eye. It was the light from the train. It wasn't long before we could start to feel the vibrations of the track from the freight train making its way toward us. Full-on panic set itself upon Heather. She pulled and tugged wildly, trying to free herself, all in vain. The train was now making its way onto the trestle. The horn blared multiple times in a row and practically deafened us. Heather was full-on panicking now, with tears streaming down her face. She kept screaming to me while sobbing, "Please don't let me die. I don't want to die," over and over. I was quickly running out of time in the situation and decided to give it a few more desperate tries to free her. The train was almost upon us now. With tears in my eyes, I kissed her forehead and said, "I'm so sorry, Heather. I love you." I started to make my way to the edge of the trestle to avoid my fate. As I pulled away from Heather, I felt two hands clasp around my forearm. "Please don't leave me to die," Heather screamed. Her arms were wrapped around my forearm, locking me next to her and directly in the path of the train. She looked like a wild animal, desperate to survive. I couldn't even imagine what was going through her head, but I couldn't blame her for clinging on to hope. I begged her to release me and did everything I could to get free, but her fear must have enabled her to grip me with some incredible strength, as I couldn't pull free. The train was mere seconds away. I turned my head to look at the approaching death machine. That's when it happened. I just barely noticed out of the corner of my eye. Her face changed instantly from a tearful, panic-stricken face to one that was just happily smiling back at me. The sight of this face legitimately shocked me. I turned back to her now smiling face, and I struck out to free myself. I felt incredibly bad about smacking her, but this was about survival at this point. I had a chance and she didn't. I'm not proud, but I quickly dove to the edge and managed to cling onto the side of the tracks. Then the train arrived. I saw her panic-stricken face with her arm reaching out desperately as the train ran her down. I heard screams and cries, but then nothing but the sounds of the train. I held on desperately to the edge. At this point, my body was at its physical limit, as I had been trying so hard to free Heather this whole time. I wasn't sure if I could hold on the entire time, as my arms were already aching, and the vibrations from the train passing certainly didn't make things any easier. Thankfully, the train was one of the shorter ones, and passed by before long. I slowly made my way back onto the tracks, body aching and emotionally and mentally broken. I tried to see what was left of Heather on the tracks, but if any part of her was still in existence, it didn't appear to be on the track. I sobbed as I made my way back to safety. I had no idea what I was going to do. What was I going to say to Heather's parents, her friends and family? Hell, how was I going to deal with any of this myself? I know I did everything I could, but I couldn't help but feel if I somehow did something better or something differently, things wouldn't have turned out how they did. I finally reached the end of the bridge and began to head towards the woods again. As I approached the woods, I heard a voice from the edge of the woods. It startled me completely, partly because I didn't know anyone else was there, and also because it sounded so familiar. It rang out with, "What was that?" I turned my head and my face instantly drained of all color. There was Heather, perfectly intact and unharmed. I immediately dropped to the ground to try and prevent myself from fainting. Heather made her way up to me, her own face fairly colorless as well. She started running her hands through my hair and asking if I was okay, and repeatedly kissing my forehead. I was very confused at this point, considering I had just watched her die. She then started to explain everything to me. She told me that when she rushed ahead, she decided it would be a great time to go pee in the woods. By the time she made her way back towards the bridge, she saw me with another girl by the tracks. At first, she thought I ran into some friend of mine or something, and she was going to try and scare us. But when she looked closer, she noticed the girl was, well, her. She was absolutely terrified at this point, and kind of stood back and just observed. Once she saw that I had followed this mimic out on the trestle, she apparently tried to call for me to let me know that it wasn't her. But the sounds of the train masked all the sounds she was making. At this point in the night, I just wanted to go home. I let her drive as I was just too exhausted and confused at the whole situation. She drove me home and stayed the night at my place, as I didn't want to be alone. Things were very quiet between us for a while. I suppose we were both pretty traumatized by the whole experience. I no longer get a good night's sleep, as I keep having nightmares of watching her get run over by a train. I know now that it wasn't her, but my mind still insists on replaying this trauma on a nightly basis. She seems to be struggling with a lot of guilt on her end, for not letting me know that wasn't her a little earlier, since she almost got me killed. It's rough, and we have considered going to therapy about it, but then, what the hell would we tell the therapist that won't end up getting us both committed? Anyway, I just needed to get this story out there. I always thought all those people dying at Pope Lick were just idiots that pushed their luck too much, or didn't know the train was still active. I now believe differently. I know now that there is a monster living near the Pope Lick Trestle Bridge. Maybe it did appear as a goat man for someone, but it certainly wasn't for me. It's something not of our world, that's for sure. Something that can mimic whatever it wants, it seems, and enjoys leading innocent people to their demise. Please, whatever you do, don't visit the Pope Lick train trestle. The monster is real, and it could be wearing your face. Now, from what I know about the skin entities, that kind of, for me, sounds a lot more like one of them because of the shape-shifting that it did and luring someone to their deaths. Now, we have these stories of people who have said they have had first-hand encounters with an entity, with a goat man or something like it. Can I prove that these are true or are they just stories? I can't. And so that's kind of up to you to decide for yourself as well. Either way, they're all super eerie, and I think we can agree, stay off the tracks. All right, friends, I hope you found this episode interesting. I know that it was a little bit short, but I really wanted to get back into the swing of things. I was also really surprised by how few firsthand stories there are available on the internet. Maybe it's more of a thing that you kind of have to hear by word of mouth, but I'm not sure. Either way, something about the Pope Lick monster just gives me the ickies, and obviously I had to share those with you so that you can suffer with me. Thanks again for being so patient since it's been so long between episodes. Please tune in next time for our newest true crime case, and as always, if you have suggestions for a cryptid or true crime case, you can find me at Cryptids and Cases on both Facebook and Instagram, or Cryptids, capital N, Cases on Twitter/X. I'm most active on my Facebook page though, so definitely swing by there. All right, guys, I will love you and leave you there. Until the next one. Bye, guys.